Greg, I thought that the Chinese government had banned a lot of imports of, these kinds of recyclables. Is that the case for electronic waste or is not?
Yeah, I don't think it's the same for e-waste. I think that follows a different waste stream pathway. That's my understanding. So the national sword policy that was enacted 3 or 4 years ago now, I think it was, that dealt more with the like the plastics, the recyclables, stuff that like waste management would be sending over from their waste facility, their waste treatment plants. Those were the ships that are being turned back, and they're going to multiple locations within China. So I think this trade, and my understanding is since that time, that province, Guayu, they've done some work to try to improve the conditions. It's still processing a lot of the electronic waste, but now they're building warehouses, and I think in part it was due to the pressure and a lot of the stories that were coming out about it. So I'm fairly certain it's still happening. This is at least as I was checking from 2019 was the last story I saw on it, where it was mentioning some of the improvements, but still processing quite a bit of the e-waste. So I think they're kind of separate. I don't think National Sword is dealing with the e-waste trade.
I keep wondering, Greg, though, if no matter who is dealing with it, we're shipping it away, to another place, essentially, I think. Mm-hmm. So if it's not China, it's somewhere else in another place in the world, I do believe, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's been many of those stories coming out where after once China said no, there were other sites and they were trying to say no. And so, yes, I mean, and I think that's precisely it. Is away is somewhere, it has to be. And, right. And yeah, at some point there is somebody dealing with that refuse. And in many cases, it is just being stocked, right? Like in that PBS documentary, they mentioned that a lot of these recycling plants are just holding, kind of storing these materials until there's a market for them somewhere. So it's not that they're all being shipped over somewhere else, but many of those are just not being processed like they once were, and they're just accumulating in these yards.
Greg, I certainly find this very eye-opening. I guess one of the things, I heard the Coke representatives talking about options they're exploring. I guess when I look at, the monitors that we're all using right now for this Zoom call and computers where we're all using the same resources, are you aware of what kind of alternatives manufacturers have for products like this that are more easily recycled, truly recycled? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I know there are companies that are increasingly looking at that. I think Dell is one of them, right? They're trying to manufacture computers and monitors that contain more sustainable materials. I do think at some level, there's components of computers that just don't have, that are difficult to, if you get to the metals or a lot of the, what's being mined. I don't think you can get around the need for those types of supplies. And I'm speaking from ignorance there. I don't know everything that goes into a computer, but I do think companies are looking at it. You can also, in terms of that end of life, there are places that recycle and keep it within the U.S. So I know Staples has a program where they will take electronics and they're not shipping it overseas. And there's a website called eStewards, I believe it's called, that shows some of the better places to get rid of the e-waste when you're done with it, as opposed to just dumping it or putting it by the roadside. So I don't know current trends in terms of more sustainable products, but I know there's companies that are the notion of zero waste is becoming more and more common, right? And how do we, from beginning to end of the life cycle of a product, how do we keep these things, try to keep materials in circulation? All right, so let's look at the.
Can I just make a comment, Greg, real quick?
Go ahead, Marie. Yeah, sure.
I can't cite any sources, but I know that in my time of reading and spending time thinking about this more, I've run into just enough places or people or organizations who have figured out ways of reusing pieces, as you're talking about, that no one else thought of, and they came up with sources. I would love to go back and try to find those in it, because I think that there's some really genius people out there who are thinking about alternative, creative, beyond something that's useless, but a lot of crafts people in third world countries, and even beyond that, really useful things, and it just makes me wonder. I don't. Again, you're probably hearing my ignorance more than you are anything that is contributory, but it seems like that there are some people out there that are really thinking about this differently. And that the message that I got is that I have to think about this differently. And that's what I've been trying to do as an individual. And that's all.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And there's so many, I mean, it's multifaceted. I think one of the interesting things from that video is when you think about the farmers who are exploring this work out of necessity, right? They know there's more money involved in that, right? So you have that element of kind of financial sustainability for the farmers. And it goes back to why are they having trouble making money off of farming and having a sustainable life on farming? There's also issues of obsolescence, right? Both perceived, but also planned obsolescence, where does a computer need to only last for 2 years, a year? And, I know Apple recently was in trouble for intentionally slowing down old iPhones, right? And they had a major fine for that. And so there's those issues too, of not even just materially, but software updates that now render, there's an interesting kind of connection between the value of a product based on how quick it is or how much we're able to, kind of keep up with the latest processing technology and things like that. So there's, again, many angles from which to address that. And only, one of those angles, an important one, is what are the materials going into it? And at least reflecting on and thinking about, like we had discussed in that novel last week, what does it mean to view a product first as waste in terms of what is going to happen to this in 5 or 10 years? And then to backtrack and say, well, what can we do to help prevent some of those problems that we can perceive going forward? So I think you're right, Maria. I think there's many, and there's some interesting studies coming out about plant-based materials that can be, I think Bill mentioned this last week. So alternative strategies too, but I think you're right. People are definitely exploring these issues.
Is it also time to look at our overconsumption, that maybe we have to slow down our consumption as part of the effort and advocacy and activity that can happen?
Yeah, I thought of this morning when Henry asked me to go downstairs and bring up the Peppa Pig toys. And I thought, we have literally these toys on reserve that we can bring up from the basement. You know what I mean? So I think, and thinking about preparing for this class, absolutely, there's an element there of our practices. We do have a certain level of responsibility. I think you're absolutely right.
Greg, apologies for being late, by the way.
No
I missed almost half of it. But from an engineering perspective, I just wanted to share that real quick, because I think a lot of people touched on that. And I have, as a Penn State College of Engineering alumni, I'm on an advisory board. And so I'm somewhat reconnected to Penn State's College of Engineering. And I know it's not unique to Penn State. I see a huge shift in energy, and it starts from recruiting high school students all the way through to where the College of Engineering is putting its resources, from the challenge of making computers faster, to making robots smarter, and more of the research and the interest is shifting towards sustainable engineering, culturally and societally valuable engineering that is focused on technology that achieves these things we're talking about. How do we make computers that are safer for the environment? How do we make clean water technologies? All the using engineering in societally responsible ways. I'm seeing much more interest in that. Now it'll take time for that to shift, but there's some piece of good news there. I think that the power of the minds and the engineering, the money, all of that is starting to get that's the bigger problem, not making a computer slightly faster. But you're absolutely right, Susan. I mean, as long as people will keep paying $1,000 for an iPhone that has, I mean, honestly, the displays on these iPhones are getting to the point where the human eye can't even recognize the difference, and yet someone will still pay for it because my iPhone has sharper pictures than yours. That has to change. You're right, Susan.
And making corporations more responsible for the end cost of their products.
Yeah, true.
That to me would be another way to go, advocacy-wise.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Steve. That is encouraging to hear on that level. Well, let me share. I'm going to have another question that I want us to think about, and I'm guessing we can spend a good amount of time on that. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I can make this PowerPoint available. It will fill in some of the details, but I'm going to kind of go to the conclusion of this book. Let me share my screen. All right, so the environmental justice movement, one of the reports that I know we've discussed on the Peace and Justice Committee that comes out of this PCB landfill protest. And this was a protest that occurred in North Carolina as a result of a landfill that was being sited in North Carolina that was in response to a previous illegal dumping activity. And there was a protest that ensued. And from that, there was a report, Toxic Waste and Race at 20. The first report was in 1987, and this is a report from the United Church of Christ. And their main conclusion, so this is 5 years after the PCB landfill protest, it says people of color make up the majority of those living in host neighborhoods within 3 kilometers of the nation's hazardous waste facilities. So pointing to where is a way in the United States, and in particular, where is a way for our waste? And why is it that we see the majority of these places being cited in minority communities? But Philadelphia, what's interesting about this report is Philadelphia is one that has a very unique history where it's not initially, where it was not there was more than just simply the minority component. The root causes, and this is according to a sociologist at Drexel in her book From Workshop to Waste Magnet. And she identifies that for the Philadelphia region, the root causes of inequality were social class disadvantage and white privilege. And here's how she outlines that. She goes through the history, and I'm going to skip through this for now. But again, I'll post the PowerPoint. You can go back and take a look at that. But the summary, right, if we think about where is our way and why is it that most of the waste that we produce will end up at one of 2 incineration facilities in Chester or Camden. Why is it that those particular sites have been designated? There's a really interesting reason for why those sites were chosen. And this is how she outlines that. She says, the drawbacks associated with the incineration facilities, they fueled this suspicion in the residents that those communities were chosen because they lacked the capacity to successfully resist unwanted and unhealthy waste disposal technologies. And so for many, that leads them to conclude that this is the result of those powerful members of society forcing these incineration facilities on those who don't have the political voice to enact change or to resist those sites being implemented in their own backyards. But she problematizes that narrative a little bit. And I'm going to read two short passages that document why Chester and Camden were chosen and the way in which those cities tend to become what she calls waste magnets. So here's the first part of that. She says, the story of how trash incinerators came to be sited in Camden and Chester, two predominantly minority, poor industrial communities, is not one of hazardous facilities imposed by the powerful on an unwilling community. Nor is it the story of racist white mayors colluding with county governments to impose hazards on their hapless constituents. Just as municipal leaders in Robbins, Illinois, sought an incinerator project, African-American mayors in Camden and Chester actively sought out incinerators. In all of these cases, the environmental racism is not manifest in discriminatory targeting of the community as a waste repository by others, but in the impoverishment and institutional neglect of minority communities that creates a state of severe economic crisis. Within this context, providing waste disposal services can appear to be the only viable alternative for economic development. When such communities are negatively racialized, they may be perceived as the best candidates to host waste disposal facilities. Importantly, environmental racism is also manifest in the way that wastes are exported from predominantly white, affluent, and upper middle class communities and imported into predominantly minority, poor African communities. So there's an instance there of economic development, right? This being deemed the only way to encourage economic growth in those areas. But then this is the effect of that. This is how those places, once they become sites that are chosen, whether it be by the mayors of those towns or not, this is what occurs. So in Camden and Chester, both of these illustrate the detrimental effect on the community of becoming a waste magnet. Once a community agrees to host large-scale waste facilities, it becomes the go-to place for more and more waste disposal land uses. Time and energy sorely needed for improving harmful conditions in the community, such as poor schools, high crime rates, poverty, unemployment, poor housing, and food deserts, instead must go to simply defending the community from being inundated with other people's waste. Waste disposal sites also tend to repel other, more desirable land uses, such as retail or housing, and thereby make it more difficult to increase the tax base and the financial strength of the community. Because they bring added pollutants to parcels of land already zoned for industrial use, the addition of more waste disposal sites ensures that a cleanup is necessary to change the zoning to another land use. This makes it more difficult for the community to change the direction of land use development later. So I think that provides a helpful backdrop to our own backyard. Where does that waste go? Camden and Chester, right? Two incineration facilities. And so when we think through why that is the case, right, there's, just like we saw with the Guayu, we're saying there's a kind of perceived economic benefit. But then as that occurs, these sites tend to become waste magnets, and they dig a rut, right, where it's very hard now to remove yourself from being perceived as the dumping site for your community. And trash from all over is shipped to Chester and Camden. They're massive incineration facilities. And so that's where ROA is, right? This is one of those facilities. And the cancer rates, respiratory issues are much higher in these sites. If you've ever driven through these areas, and especially down the roads near these incineration facilities, there's noticeable air quality issues. All right, and then just really briefly want to mention to you two laws, one in New Jersey that was recently enacted. This is in September 2020, known as the New Jersey Environmental Justice Law. This is an active link. You can also look up the 6-page document that shows the heart of this legislation, and it's S-232, and this is what it does, right? It says that the Department of Environmental Protection needs to evaluate the environmental and public health impacts on vulnerable communities when reviewing permit applications for certain new facilities, such as gas-fired power plants, incinerators, sewage plants, landfills, and others. Okay, and so this is seen as one of the really landmark environmental justice laws as it relates to the siting of these facilities. And there's actually a meeting on May 20th that's coming up that you're able to participate in, and I've included the link here for that, where they will be considering some suggestions as to what the Environmental Justice Advisory Board focuses on in the future. And so this is should you be interested, this is one way that you can be active in thinking through certain laws like this as they pertain to Pennsylvania. The agenda items are listed. So thinking through some of the more local opportunities to produce some policy level change, this is a way to do that. And then here's the question that I'd like us to consider together, since one of our main tasks here is to consider as a church how we think about these issues in light of the Matthew 25 initiative. Wanted us to consider the 3 strategic themes of DPC's strategic plan. And those 3 themes are worship of God, growing in faith, and mission and service. And so I'd just like to talk with you now about what you think DPC's role is in promoting environmental justice and how it relates to those 3 strategic themes. Let me put that question in the chat bar here. Hold on a minute. Right, so it's there for you to reference. But I'm curious, how do you see our role in promoting environmental justice as a church, and how might that fit with the 3 strategic themes of DPC's strategic plan?
Greg, I don't have an answer to that question, but I do think the thing that really struck me with what you just shared, I guess when I knew this topic, I was anticipating more of a storyline of these incinerators, for instance, being placed in communities against the objections of the locals. And so what I've heard really clearly from your really wonderful presentation was the impact of economic issues that led the leaders in those communities to accept these incinerators. And so to me, that's where that tie in again with Matthew 25 back to the intersectionality with poverty. That I heard that, really clearly in a way I hadn't anticipated.
I mean, that also, when I read this book, and again, I highly recommend it. She's a local author, and I just happened to see this book at Barnes and Noble, and in reading it, right, it really changed a lot of the narratives that are associated with environmental racism and justice that are true in some places, right, or some cases, but here was one where it's you have people that are welcoming these facilities, and then having to deal with some of those consequences and further promoting a lot of the injustice that's associated. Yeah, that was also very surprising to me.
Yeah.
So think about, and maybe focus on one of those 3 themes. How can something like worship of God, growing in faith, mission and service, how are those connected to Matthew 25?
Well, I think dealing with inequality is something God wants us to do. So the worship of God is intimately related to opposing racism. I mean, I think that's, at least in my mind, that's one of those things that he keeps tapping me on the shoulder to pay attention to.
And poverty also.
And poverty as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're intertwined intimately.
Well, you heard in service this morning about the haves and the have-nots. There's no incinerators where the haves live. We know that. But there's, and there's very little, if any, not that I know of every area in the country or world, but environmental injustice where there's people that are very wealthy. You know, there is this sort of magnetism. I think that book sounds like it did a really good job of explaining it. That when people think about building a factory or where a company that's going to be in an incinerator, they don't think about doing that in beautiful Bucks County. They think about doing it in the lower part of Bucks County or Chester or Camden. And that's the kind of thinking, though, that's all over. And God doesn't want us to do that. He doesn't want us to separate ourselves. At least that's the message I'm getting from God, that I'm to be putting my arms around my brothers and sisters, no matter what color, no matter how much money they have. And by living, choosing to live a certain way, I'm not doing that.
Greg, I think we have to be a little bit careful. I understand that whole concept of the leadership, or whatever you want to call it, of Camden and Chester saying you can bring it here, but I wouldn't want to focus there entirely without saying it's because of the economic inequality that we allow also, or that persists, that people are frustrated and don't know what to do. And when this is one of the ways of bringing money and employment to people, they jump on it. So I think we have to be careful that we don't say, oh, well, they wanted it there.
Mm-hmm. Daphne, you looked like you were going to add something. Or at least you unmuted. Maybe I'm wrong. Sorry.
I was thinking in terms of like maybe, basically, I think it comes down to treat others like you would yourself. I think it's very basic. I mean, when you're dealing with waste or anything else, I think you have to really, treat others. I mean, if you're not going to put something in your backyard, why are you putting it in theirs? So we have to be able to learn some way of disposing, or that it isn't hurting others.
I just want to kind of jump in here. I've always felt strongly that the longest journey starts with a single step. We need to start making first steps just in our own lives, in our own perceptions. And Greg, this class has been an unbelievable eye opener. It's just, we can try and influence others, but ultimately I can control what I do. And maybe that's where it starts, that this small group looks at things differently and and hopefully that will be, like the ripples in a pond when you throw a stone, that it grows from there.
Janet, to add to that, I can say that I have a friend who's done I think a fabulous job of turning around her way of using materials. And by going to her home and seeing what she's doing and her talking to me about it, I am trying to do the same things. So I think that there's some legitimacy in what you're saying, that it may seem small, but it might not take very long for it to expand out to others. I've thought about, I don't want to take out if anybody else has something to say on the topic, but I've thought about listing some of the new ways of recycling is such a, maybe not the word I'm looking for, but reusing or not buying paper, buying bamboo and leading people down roads that maybe they don't know exist. And they don't know that they exist pretty easily. Yes, it's expensive, but then when you cost it out, and helping to educate people about shifting the ways their purchasing decisions and their consumption way activities. It's something that I'm learning day by day, little thing by little thing. But I'd be really interested in knowing what other people are doing.
Yeah, it's a good question, Marie. And we have 2 minutes here. I'm looking at the clock, but I did want to, and I appreciate you. It's really helped me think through all of this. So thank you. And I think it's exactly what I hope we keep doing. This conversation I hope we keep having is considering, how this relates to what the mission of our church is, the objectives of our church in both small and big ways. But just kind of in terms of next week, practically, are there any topics? What are you interested in discussing? Is there anything, a theme or a question that you want to explore further? Whether we just spend the whole time talking through that, or whether you want more of a background or anything I can do research into to provide some context. So what's left? What haven't we talked about? What would you like to consider further?
Well, I would throw out the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
One way to, I guess, amplify the impact is to connect with the greater Presbyterian Church. I coined the term there. I know that's not a real thing, but Philadelphia Presbytery, and then beyond. First of all, what are, if any, what other sort of initiatives of this area are happening at that sort of greater level? And if not, is there any way we can start doing that, connecting with the other churches in the Presbytery, that sort of thing? That would be just interesting to know.
And I was thinking just ways to educate. I've only been to 2 classes and it won't be here next week, but just to educate our faith community in a Matthew 25 church, what maybe tips to put in the tidings or make it part of the curriculum or part of the youth group's activities. I know they recycled at Peace Valley. There is some of that. They picked up trash at Peace Valley as an event, but if we make it kind of a mission, like a practical ways we can start, and this education is phenomenal. I thank you.
And while I think of there being some real value in us as a church, looking at our church's use of material and how our church can make further adaptations. But I also don't want to move that away from us as individuals. Focusing on the church is great, and I think that's part of it. But I think we as individuals have a big stake in God's call.
Well, what I'll say is, if anything does come up throughout the week, if there's a topic, if you see a news story, whatever that may be, feel free to email me. But I'm going to take those comments into consideration and do some thinking. I have a little more time to think this week, so I get my final exam, the last one, on Friday. So grades are due Tuesday, and then I can start to focus a bit more on things like this. So I really appreciate all of your comments. It's helped me to think through these things. Really have enjoyed the conversation with you, and I will do some digging and try to come up with some questions or themes, some answers even to the 3 points that were just discussed. But should anything else come up, definitely reach out, and I would be happy to consider those further. All right.
Thank you for your hard work.
Of course, yeah, and happy Mother's Day again. Hope you have a wonderful day. Does anybody want to close us in prayer today?
Be happy to do that.
All right, thanks, John.
We give thanks, oh God, for this time of continued learning and listening. Thank you for Greg's faithfulness in helping us understand things that many of us have not known before. We know that such understanding is truly only the first step. And so we pray that you will guide us both as he prepares for our final class together and as we discern as individuals and as a community of faith how you're calling us to proceed. We thank you for the ways that you have entrusted this earth to us, for the certainty that you have created all humankind in your image, and pray that as we seek to be faithful to your call, that we will continue to determine specific ways that we can bring those two truths together and shape all that we do. So go before us in this day and week, that in all moments we might see clear and abiding signs of your love. For it is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, John. And I will make sure, just so you're aware, I know there were some links in that PowerPoint, so I'm going to send that to Christian, and whenever he posts this video, I'll ask him to have it available there as well, just so you can get the book reference and all that stuff. So
Great.
Have a wonderful day and a great week, and you can join us next Sunday.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Greg.
Great to
Bye-bye.
see you.
Bye, Greg.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.